Welcome to Super Training. My name is Chris, and in this video, I'm going to be walking you through SAP's flagship ERP product, also known as S/4HANA. And in this video, we're going to be taking it at a very beginner level. So if you do want more information and detail in relation to the various things we're going to be discussing in this video, I will have a link down below as well as up above with access to my free Basics of S/4HANA course that you can take advantage of. So with all of that in mind, let's now dive straight into the system. All right, so here we are in the S/4HANA system in what is called the Fiori Launchpad. And I'll explain what that exactly means in a second. But a simpler way to call this would be the dashboard. Sometimes I refer to it as the home page. It's just the first thing that you're going to see when you log into the system. And before I actually start breaking down what is really seen on this dashboard, I want to make one point very clear. What you see on my Fiori Launchpad, my dashboard, is not what you are necessarily going to see when you log into the system. And there's a few reasons for that. First off, not all S/4HANA systems are identical. In fact, they're all different from one to the next because each one can have different modules that are installed with the software that allows users to do certain things. In addition to that, depending on what role that you're actually accessing the system in, that will give you certain permissions and things that you can interact with. And in addition to all of that, even if both of us were logging into the exact same system using the exact same role, we might see something very different here because I can always customize my Fiori Launchpad the way I like it. So that's why as we walk through this, I'm not going to be talking about every single little thing we see here. I'm really going to be talking about concepts more in general and introducing tools and features that are common no matter where you're logging in the S/4HANA system. So with that in mind, let's first just understand when we say Fiori Launchpad, what are we even talking about? That first word Fiori is really just kind of like an Italian-esque marketing term to describe SAP's new user interface, or at least the new one that they came out with at this point over 10 years ago. Prior to Fiori, it used to be called SAP GUI, and many people actually still use SAP GUI, especially SAP consultants. Now, in other videos, I'll describe the difference between them and really break that down. For now, just understand the Fiori user interface is just a more modern, clean approach, and it's what you're seeing here. And in terms of Launchpad, it's just a title, right? It's your dashboard, it's your homepage, it's what you're interacting with, and what you always come back to as a home base in the system. So now, with that basic concept in mind, let's start to break down the various things that we're seeing here. And the first thing I'm going to do is start with, if you see, we kind of have this line here at the top. I'm going to describe everything above that line because those are the kinds of things that are going to be uniform or at least a stable point no matter who's accessing the system. So let's start from top to bottom, left to right. The first thing we have here is this SAP logo, which in almost all cases is going to be visible on the top left of your screen. And it allows you the ability to simply come right back here to your Fiori Launchpad no matter where you are in the system. So it's a great thing to reorient yourself and get yourself back to the home base. And then over from the right here, we have this little home with a drop-down arrow. Now, in terms of if we went into the drop-down arrow, there's some additional things that I'm going to explain in a second. But what you see here with the title of home, obviously that describes the fact that we are on the home page. As we start to go into the system, you're going to see this title change. And it generally, although not always, will reflect what you're on. So if you jump into certain records or you're dealing with certain tools, this title will generally inform you where you're at. So you can just at a glance look up in the top left and know, oh, great, I'm on this particular app or I'm in this particular customer record, etc. Now, over from that, way on the right here, there's a few important things you should be aware of. First thing is this little magnifying glass. Now, the concept of a search capability is not new. I'm sure everyone is very familiar with that. The only thing I want to point out specifically is not only that you can search things, but you also have the ability to filter your search very easily based on a number of different parameters. So if you want to look specifically for bank accounts, you can choose banks. Very commonly, you'll search apps, and I'll explain what an app is more specifically in a second, or to do all, which allows you to, if, for example, you search sales order, that'll not only look for apps related to sales orders, it'll pull up specific sales orders or anything that has something to do with the words sales order. So that's how the search capability works. And then over here on the right, as with pretty much any software that you run into these days, that's your kind of profile icon. And if you click on that, it allows you to change things like your personal settings. It gives you a few additional customization features in terms of what your dashboard's going to look like. It's got a few things in there that are going to be relevant to you as the user. All right, so now let's move down. And the next main thing we see here is this row of what you could consider these categories of things. And before I explain that, I think it's really more appropriate to first introduce the concept of apps, which I referenced a little bit earlier. If I dive into one of these particulars, so I'm going to click on purchasing, it's going to bring me to this page. So this is actually the purchasing overview page, or better known as a space. And every tile that we see here is what is called an app. In this day and age, when we hear the term app, we usually think of, obviously, application, the concept of a fully formed product that has a lot of different things that you can do and interact with. When you're dealing with apps in S/4HANA, I think it's much more sensible to view the concept of an app as a very specific function or activity or tool. So if you see here, again, every one of these being an app, you can see things like monitor purchase requisition items. That one function has its own app. Managing purchase orders, that one function has its own app. And even if we come up here to the search bar and look for sales order, you'll get a concept of how many apps there exist in the system. So if I am looking for apps only related to sales orders, you can see the results are 43 specific apps that do everything from importing sales orders, creating new ones, selecting them, tracking them, managing them, all different elements. Those are each separated into their own apps. Whereas you would usually think that any kind of interaction with sales orders might all be encapsulated in one app. It's simply not that way in S/4HANA. And that's a really important part of the system to understand. Every little function and feature is broken up into its own application. And then part of the problem that you run into with that is you now have often hundreds or even thousands of apps in the system. So what happens is they're then grouped together in various ways, but one of the core ways they're grouped, if I come back up here to the logo and I click on that, it brings us back to our home dashboard. What we're seeing at the top here with these little titles, these are really groupings of apps, which in this particular case, these groupings are referred to as spaces. So these are spaces that have been pinned to our Fiori Launchpad. And if I wanted to see all of the various spaces that I could have arranged here or I could have pinned, I can come over here to the three lines on the left, and it gives me this, what in this case is kind of an absurdly long list of various spaces. Now, every one of these spaces, for example, if I come here to document management, each one has a number of apps within it. It might have 5, it might have 50. There are so many different apps possible. And again, in my full-fledged course, I walk through even more ways to interact with apps or to even group your apps as you want them. But for now, we understand kind of that root level we've got is an app, and then they're grouped together using either spaces here at the top or what we have here, which are pages. And these are simply tiles that have a number of apps that have all been grouped, generally by some kind of process area or certain task or responsibility that the user will have. Now, lower down from that, you can see we have a lot of additional things. We've got tiles for metrics and analytics. Down here, I have a to-do list. There are a lot of additional things that you can add to your dashboard. You would generally customize your dashboard to be most applicable for you as a user and the role that you have at your company. So if you know you're going to be dealing with accounts receivable, then you're going to have a lot of metrics related to accounts receivable. You're going to have tasks that are in that particular area, and you can always come into these drop-down menus, or on the right here, you've got a few different features that allow you to add additional tiles, remove them, customize, refresh, etc. So scrolling back to the top here, that should give you a bit of a concept of what we're dealing with at your Fiori Launchpad. Now let's actually dive into the system and do what I would consider a pretty simple function, which is we're going to create a customer and then we're going to create a sales order that's tied to that customer. Now, that might sound very simple, and in a lot of other ERP systems, it is a very quick process to make a customer and then generate a sales order off of that customer. But when you're dealing with S/4HANA, you'll quickly start to realize that the architecture of the system is much deeper than you're going to run into with most other ERP systems. So it's not as simple as just creating a customer. In fact, if we want to create a customer, what we have to do first is create what's called a business partner. Now, let me introduce a concept here, and you may already be familiar with this, but in these kinds of ERP systems, you generally have master records and then transactional records. So master records would be things like vendors, customers, general ledger accounts, items, and then transactional records would be really anything with the title order in them, like sales orders, purchase orders, etc., as well as things like invoices, material documents, etc. So we are going to create a business partner, which is a master record, and that business partner really serves as a sort of a shell in which you can then add customers as a role. So let me show you what that looks like. We're going to come up here to our search bar and we're going to look for business partner. So we're looking for apps related to business partners. And we've got a lot of different apps that come up here, 54 in total. But this first one that appears is actually, this type of app is one of the most commonly used and one of the most useful apps that you're going to find in your S/4HANA system. This app is a manage app. So you can have manage apps for business partners, sales orders, items, also known as materials. You can have it for a lot of different things. And if we click on this app, you're going to see why it's so useful. So it brings us to this page where we have a bunch of filters on top that allow us to go, okay, well, what kind of business partners do we want to look at? And then we're going to have a full list, depending on the filters, of the specific business partners down below. Now, in this case, I don't have any filters set, and so there's nothing listed out here. I'm going to come over here and click go, which is going to say, okay, fine, you have no filters. I'm going to pull up every single business partner, which in this case is 2,520, which might not even be a lot of business partners for most companies. In this particular demo account, it looks like a lot of people have been in the system making various kind of test business partners. So they're all listed out here. I could easily come in, add filters like I only want to see business partners that have a customer role. It would really bring that list down greatly. I can also change what filters I have available, as well as if I come in here, I could change the various results that come up. So if I didn't want to see city, I could take that off. I could remove postal code, hit OK, and it actually changes the results in the columns that we see in our list below. Okay, so that's a concept of what this app does. And again, not just for business partners, this manage app can be used for a lot of different things. But what we need to do at this point is we need to create a new business partner. So we have that functionality here as well. I'm going to come over here and hit create. And by doing so, it's going to say, well, do you want to create a person or an organization? Well, I'm going to do an organization because that's more common. And the first thing it's going to do, and this is true for a lot of instances where you're trying to create a new document, is it'll give you a preliminary pop-up that'll say, why don't you give me some basic upfront information, especially some key information. And it's not going to generate the record from that, but it's going to use that initial information to populate the record ready to then be created. Now, as we're looking at the fields here, and this is going to be true not just right now, but also throughout this video, there are a lot of different fields. And like I said earlier, the architecture of the system can go quite deep. So in many instances, there's a lot of specific pieces of information that need to be input, even when you're doing something as simple as trying to create a customer. To be able to properly explain that full architecture and all the various things you need to input requires a lot of talking, frankly. I'm going to have to make full courses just so that people can understand what the system, how it's built, what are the key pieces of information to input and why. So for the sake of this video, which is really just at a beginner level, I'm not going to be able to explain every single field here. So some things I'm just going to be inputting. I'll try to give you a very quick concept of what I'm doing, and then I'm just going to move through it. And then in my other SAP courses, I'll walk through all of these fields in much greater detail. So for now, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. And the first things first, you don't actually have to fill in all of these fields. There's only certain fields that are mandatory to fill in. So for example, grouping, this really just gives the system a concept of the numbering system that's going to be utilized. In other words, is this customer number 5, well, in this case, business partner, 5, 6, or is it 3010? That concept. And then business partner role. So we do want to add role. We want to add that customer, but we're actually going to do that in a second. I don't need to do it here. I'm going to go in here to organizational title. This is where I'm telling the system, well, what company am I dealing with? And I want to give this particular business partner a name. So let's say we call it XYZ company. That's our business partner. Now we could fill in the address information here, although that's not mandatory. I'm going to leave that as is, and I'm going to hit OK on this. And it brings us to this page. Now, as I said before, I have not created a business partner yet. I simply put in a bit of initial information. It brings me to this page and says, okay, good. What else do you want to input before we save this thing? So you can see we're on a new business partner. Also note, I pointed out this little field at the top. Previously that said home, then it said manage because we were on that manage app. Now we're on the business partner. So it's always good to look up in the top left there to orient yourself as what page are you on. And if you ever get disoriented and you don't know where you are in the system, you can always hit this SAP home button. It'll bring you back to your Fiori Launchpad. So let's now take a look at this and decide what else do we need to input here before we ultimately save this record and move forward on our objective of creating a customer and a sales order from that. So first things first, I'm going to scroll down here and you can see we have a lot of different information. And in fact, we have our kind of taskbar at the top here. Every one of these options is a sort of a area or a header down below. So if I want to go to bank accounts, for example, if I click on this, it sends me all the way down to the relevant part of this record that has the bank account information. I actually want to come up here to roles because I need to add the customer role within this business partner. Now, one of the reasons they set up business partners this way is so that if you had, for example, a business partner that was both a customer but also a vendor for you, you can combine them all into one business partner. Whereas in other systems, you have to separate them as if they're completely different organizations. So here we are going to add what is called a customer role. You can see I have customer right here. And to actually generate a sales order, there's another role that I have to add. So I'm going to hit create on this. And it pushes that customer role down and I can then add a second one. Now, again, for the sake of this video, this is getting a little bit too elaborate to explain properly, but the simple version is to allow the system to do the full order to cash process where you generate a sales order, you ship goods, you then invoice the customer, and then eventually they pay. To allow that entire process, you need what's called a customer and what's called a FI customer or a financial management customer. So I'm going to put in FI customer. It's going to pull up this option of FI customer. I'm going to say okay on that. So now if we scroll down, we have the address. So obviously we have to put that in. Let's say we do 123 Fairbanks Avenue and we'll put in some basic random info. Let's say this is in Culver and we're going to go countries, United States, region, in this case is state. So let's say that's California. That information is not needed. We're going to also add the language. So the system knows this is in fact in English. So once we've got all that in, we now can come down here to this bar. Now this bar is very important in the system. This often gives us an indication of what we're doing with the record that we're on. So if you are, for example, editing a record, which you're going to see in a second, it will give you some concept. It'll say, do you want to save it? Do you want to discard? We're at the create step. So it gives us a create and a discard. It will also, as you're working in the system, if you run into errors or if there are warnings that the system's trying to give you, they will also provide you that information on the far left, which I'm actually going to show you in a little bit. So for now, we've got what we need. Let's hit create. Okay, and it says right there, the master data record is created. So we've now generated a business partner that has two roles within it, FI customer and customer. And you can see up here, there's an internal ID for this business partner. If you remember, I had that grouping, so that allowed it to know what numbering system to utilize for my XYZ company. But if I want to generate a sales order, there's actually quite a bit more additional information I need to input. So to do that, I'm going to come over here. You can see this is now we're currently in view mode. So I'm not able to change anything in the system because I just created the record. So I have to go to edit mode first, which re-adds this bar at the bottom here so I can tell I'm in edit mode. And now I can go deeper into the business partner kind of root system to add some additional fields that will allow us to make a sales order. And really what I need to do is I need to go into the role specifically. So if you imagine it like a root system, we've got business partner at the top, customer below that. So we're going to come over here to this customer, and over on the far right here, we have this arrow to navigate to this record. I'm going to click on that. It's going to open up our customer record, or our customer role, I should say. And you'll also notice it actually changed the title up here to say customer to allow us to kind of understand where we are in the hierarchy. So we are on the customer, and there's really a few things we need to add here. So I'm going to come over to company codes. And again, I'm not going to explain this in great detail, but just understand we have to put some specific information in terms of what company we're dealing with, and we're going to have to input the sales area for the system to know how to deal with this. So I'm going to come here to create, and I'm going to input a company code 1710. If you don't know why I chose that specific number, that's totally fine. That's relevant to this particular demo account and what is set up here. The company code you would end up dealing with in your actual S4HANA account, you would be very familiar with what company code to utilize. So I'll explain the hierarchy of the system later, but for now, just understand this is not a complex part of the system. It's pretty straightforward. Now, because we're down here, and you can even see it says company code at the top here, so we're pretty far down in the root system. And down here, even though we're in edit mode for the business partner, when we're at the lower level, it's just called applying the information when we make these changes. So you can see on the right here, we don't have the ability to save, we have the ability to apply. And what we do is we hit apply, it boots us back up a level, and it allows us to kind of continue in with any other changes we need to make. So we've now added in that company code, which we can see here. We also need to add a sales area. So I'm going to come up here. You can see currently we have no sales area. I'm going to come in here and hit create. And similarly, I've got a sales area that I just know this system has called 1710. So I'm going to add that in. And by doing so, it automatically adds some additional information. There's one other field that I need to input on the sales area, which is the currency. Otherwise, the system's not going to be able to generate a sales order if it doesn't know what currency we're dealing with. So I'm going to hit USD. And with that input, I'm going to say, okay, we're good to go. I'll hit apply. It brings us back up out of that sales area. And the last thing I'm going to do before I fully save up and finish off on this business partner / customer is I'm going to come up here, and there's one unique identifier that I have to grab from this particular customer, which is listed here. So this ID, this internal ID for this customer, notice this number is different than the number we have up here. This ID is for XYZ company, the business partner. This ID down here is specifically for the customer. And that one is important when we generate the sales order. We're going to need to put in the ID for the customer, not the business partner, because that's really what we're tying it to, is to the customer, not the business partner, which can also be a vendor or any other kind of partner. So with that information in mind, we now want to hit apply. Technically, we're on the customer level, even though it says business partner up here. We're going to hit apply. That's going to actually bring us back up to the proper business partner level, in which case we're ready to go. Everything we needed to input is done, and we have the ability to save. So I'm going to hit save on that. All right, good. You can see master data record saved. So now let's go over to the generation of the sales order. So I'm going to come over here back to our app search, and I'm going to put in sales order. Click on that. And you can see down here we have create sales orders. That's the app we want to use, obviously. So we'll click on that. And similarly, it brings us to a little pop-up saying, hey, what's the initial information we need to be able to start off this sales order? And I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. We're just going to say, all right, we're dealing with a standard order. The sales organization, if you remember when we were on the business partner, it's 1710. You can see right here, domestic sales organization for the United States. And this time it doesn't fill in the distribution channel and division, so we'll have to manually select that. I believe this is number 10, direct sales, and the division is 00, which is just a common division. Again, I'll get into all these specifics, what these different things mean in later videos and courses. For now, we're gonna hit continue. So it's gonna bring us to kind of a shell of a sales order ready to be created, but incomplete in terms of data. And we can actually see that right here. Incompletion status is incomplete. We would not be able to create the record as is. So let's start off. We're gonna put in two things that are most important on any sales order. Who are you selling to and what are you selling them? So first thing, sold to party, we're now gonna paste in that customer ID that I had already copied. That's part of XYZ company. So we put that in, it fills in a lot of the basic information taken from that customer. So we now know, for example, the address that we're gonna be shipping this thing to, etc., which fills in right here. And if I scroll down here, there's a couple additional things I need to fill in. So I'm gonna do Incoterms. If you don't know what that means, that's fine. It's in relation to the shipping and who's responsible for that. I'll put in sort of a bogus ID here, Miracle Ave. All right, and then terms of payment, I'm gonna put that in as well. Let's say this is net 30. In other words, they're gonna need to pay within 30 days. And scrolling up here, there's actually one other field here, customer reference, that is the system's gonna want me to input, but I'm gonna leave that blank for now and I'll show you why. So let's now go over to this items tab. If I click on that, it says, okay, great. Well, what are we selling this particular customer? Now I have an item already in the system called FG127, which is a widget. So just kind of like a generic item. It's sold in what's called pieces. So it's not sold in pounds or ounces or anything like that. It's just sold as individual units. In this particular case, we're gonna sell 3 of this item. So we've got that, and I'm actually gonna hit enter, which is gonna add that, and it's gonna let us know, hey, we've got a problem with pricing. This record, which I just created very quickly in the system, it doesn't have all the information tied to the record. So it actually doesn't know what pricing to pull in to generate this sales order. So it's letting us know this is not gonna work out. We need to input the pricing. Now there's a few different ways you can input pricing. I'm gonna do what you probably wouldn't do in a real S4HANA account, but just to give you a little bit of a concept of how the system works, I can go over the far right here. You can see this little arrow. I can now dive into that particular item record with the widget. So I'm gonna click on that. So even though the sales order is still incomplete and saved over on the left, we've now gone into that particular item and I can influence the prices. You can see that right here. I'm gonna click on prices and I'm gonna manually input 2 prices, which again is pretty uncommon, but you can get a concept of the things that you can do in this system. So right here under pricing elements, I can hit create and I'm basically gonna put in what's called kind of like a standard price that will allow me to manually say what the price is going to be for this particular item. So I'm going to say it's $17 for each widget. And there's 3 widgets, so it's going to be $51 in total. And there's also one additional price I'm going to need to add. Because I'm dealing with USD, I'm selling this product in the United States, I do need to add a tax to, like a sales tax to this sale. So this is going to be as UTXJ. You don't need to remember all this, just get the concept that we're adding a price that's specifically gonna be set aside for taxes. So I'm gonna create that and I'm gonna say the sales tax in this case is 4%. Okay, so I have my price for each widget. I have my sales tax that's gonna be applied, which in total will come out to $2.04. I'm gonna hit apply on all that. It brings over that pricing information back to my sales order. So at this point, I've got what I need. There's actually one field that's still gonna complain about, but let's move forward anyways. We're gonna come down here and hit create. And it's gonna say document is incomplete, proceed anyways. Now I actually could hit okay, because notice it only says it's a warning. It's not an error. It does have enough to move forward. It's just not happy about it. So in this particular case, let's say cancel on that. I wanna know, well, why is this giving me a warning? What's the problem? I can come up here to incompleteness info and I can click on that and tell the system, hey, based on what I've got in here right now, let me know what you've got a problem with. And it's gonna say, hey, we want that customer reference that I talked about earlier. So I say, okay, fine. And you notice it comes up as a little warning here, which I had referred to earlier. So if I come back to general information, I've got my highlighted customer reference field. I'm just gonna put in a random customer reference. just to kind of appease the system. So with that input, it should be perfect at this point. I'm going to come down here and hit create. And just like that, standard order 6582 has been saved. You can see that ID has also been put up here on the top left. And that's really it. So I hope you found this video helpful. I'd also like to make it known that I have a full introduction to SAP YouTube series. I'll have a link for that down below. It's, I believe, 7 videos that introduce you to SAP as a company, all of the various products within SAP, as well as some things like what SAP is doing with AI, etc. So if you're interested in SAP and really understanding that full ecosystem, I highly recommend you check out that Introduction to SAP YouTube series. Also, if you want more full-fledged courses on SAP, really diving into the system and understanding how it works, you can find those on my website. I'll have the link for that down below. I have a lot of courses that are about to be coming out. In fact, by the time you watch this video, they're probably already released, diving in not only to S/4HANA, but some of the other popular SAP products like SuccessFactors, Concur, etc. Also, if you're looking to get your SAP certifications, I will be coming out with prep courses for that, so you know how to take and pass your certifications. And the last thing I want to comment on is something I get asked about all the time, so I might as well address it here. People ask me, how do I get my hands on a demo account so I can actually get some practical experience with the system? It's a bit of a tricky question to answer, and I'll give you the very short version here. There is a free trial account that you can gain access to. However, it's very limited in terms of its functionality. It really just gives you the look of SAP and S/4HANA, not so much the functionality. However, I will have a YouTube video on that. You might as well go look for it now, introducing you on how to find and gain access to that trial account if you still want to take a look at it, because it is still free. Up from that, there are paid demo accounts. In fact, the one that I showed you was an example of a demo account that many people have access to, and it is what I would consider still relatively cheap, in, let's say, the $200 a month range to gain access to a demo account like that. There are many different sources that have demo accounts. You can simply look for that online. However, if you want to get what's considered a proper or a fully fledged official SAP S/4HANA demo account, these usually run in the tens of thousands of dollars. So for most users, it's simply too expensive to gain access to. So again, I will have full videos really introducing the subject of SAP demo accounts, how to gain access to them, some tips and tricks on where to get them cheaply, but look for that on my YouTube channel. So overall, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe if you want to see more of my YouTube videos. I come out with a new SAP YouTube video every single week. And if you want to gain access to those, make sure you not only subscribe, but you hit the notification bell so that you are made aware of that. And with all of that in mind, I hope to see you in the next video.